Excellent. 2 o'clock. We're ready right on the dot. And so we're just going to give folks just a couple of more minutes to get their screens adjusted and get settled in, and then we'll be getting started. Well, I'm excited. We still got folks coming in on the attendees list, so we're going to give them one more minute to get set before we get going. Okay, it's 2:02, and I think it's time for us to get started today. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part one of the Mind Matters series. This program is a collaboration between the Total Care Program for Parkinson's at UT Southwestern's O'Donnell Brain Institute and the DFW Parkinson's Resource. A few quick reminders before we begin, please. We do encourage your participation. Please use the chat feature to submit questions so they can be addressed at the appropriate time. If you'd prefer to speak, click the raise hand icon. The moderator will invite you to unmute when it's your turn. This event is being recorded. By participating, you consent to be included in this recording. If you prefer not to be recorded, please use the chat feature only. Now, without further delay, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Sood to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Janice, and welcome everyone. I see a lot of familiar names in here, so welcome all. My name is Anubha Sood, for those of you who don't know me, and I lead the Total Care Program for Parkinson's disease here at the O'Donnell Brain Institute. Um, this series is very special to us. We are going to talk about some of the unspoken challenges of living with Parkinson's disease, which is emotional and mental health challenges that, we don't often address. So we really wanted a series where we could talk about this at length. And we are conducting, as Janice said, we're conducting this event and this series in partnership with DFW Parkinson's Resource. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome Shelley Kurian, who leads the nonprofit DFW Parkinson's Resource. A little introduction about Shelley. Shelley is the founder of DFW Parkinson's Resource and an entrepreneur with a background in event management and small business consulting. She previously served as executive director of SkyPass Foundation, and some of you may remember what a great organization that was, where she developed and led programs supporting people affected by Parkinson's. Inspired by her deep connection with the Parkinson's community, she founded DFW Parkinson's Resource in 2023 to connect individuals and families with meaningful resources and support. And with that, I'm going to invite Shelley to talk a little bit about her organization and introduce Dr. McDaniels. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuba. Hi, everybody. It is such a joy to be here with all of you. As Anuba said, my name is Shelley Kurian, founder of DFW Parkinson's Resource, and I just want to share a little bit about what DPR is about. We were originally founded to serve as a one-stop hub to make navigating Parkinson's just a little bit easier. Our mission is to connect those affected by Parkinson's with local resources so that they can be informed and confident and empowered to thrive. And so we would love for you, if you haven't already, to check us out at dfwparkinsons.org. And one of the areas that we see a growing need in, as Anuba said, is in mental health, which is why we're especially excited to partner with Total Care on this. And with that, I'm excited and honored to introduce you to my friend and my colleague and DFW Parkinson's board member, Dr. Brad McDaniels, who will be leading our discussion on this important topic. Dr. McDaniels is the Associate Chair and Associate Professor at the Department of Rehabilitation and Health Services at the University of North Texas, trained in rehabilitation counseling at the University of Kentucky, with postdoctoral work at Virginia Commonwealth University. He focuses on holistic wellness and Parkinson's disease, a commitment shaped by his mother's diagnosis, and serves on multiple Parkinson's advisory boards. So with that, Brad, so excited to have you here, and take it away.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Shelley. Let me share everything I need to share here so we can get moving. So, hopefully you can see that. Jump in, Shelley, if there's something that you all can't see.
Yeah, see that.
Good. Okay.
Yep.
So happy to be here. As I'm talking, we're going to have a couple of poll questions throughout today. So if you would, if you've got a phone handy, go ahead and take your camera out and scan that QR code that's on the right. If you haven't done that before, you'll get a little yellow box that comes up. Once your phone recognizes it, click on that. It will take you to this iClicker, which is what we're using today. And when you get in there, it'll say join event now, and just hit join. It's all you've got to do. If you don't want to scan it, or you're on a different device, you can also go to iClicker.com / and then enter EFDN, which is the code specifically for what we're doing today. So if you could go ahead and do that, I'll give you a second as I chat a little bit here. Always happy to do these kind of talks. I was talking with Anuba, Janice, and Shelley before this, and doing patient-focused talks is always my favorite. I think being able to, I much prefer it when I'm in person and I'm able to interact with people. I saw some names on this list whom I recognize, and always love the opportunity getting to connect with you. So let me go to the next slide. So there'll be one other opportunity after this for the scan in case you missed it for the polling. But so as Shelley said, we're going to talk a little bit today about the emotional landscape of Parkinson's. And I'm going to spend some time talking about some of the emotional challenges, but I really want to spend most of the time talking about answering the so what. That's great that we have all of these things that are challenges associated with Parkinson's, but what do we do with them? How do we deal with them? And that's a much bigger question, and much more useful talk, I believe, than talking about the problem, right? So we're going to spend some time talking about things that you can actually do starting today that can hopefully increase how you feel, improve how you feel, rather. All right, one more option here. If you haven't had a chance to scan the QR code on the right or enter the iClicker thing, once you're in, you're not going to see anything until we get to a poll in a few screens. And so what'll happen is when we get to that poll, you'll open back up your phone, and that poll will show up on your phone, and you'll answer the question. I'll kind of talk you through that as we're doing it. So,
Brad, just
yes.
a minute to mention the poll. For those who cannot make it work, I think it should be okay if they just want to type out the response in the chat
Sure.
as well.
Yep, of course. Yeah. So here are our learning objectives today. We're going to talk about some common emotional challenges associated with Parkinson's disease. And like I said, and then we're going to talk about some practical strategies, things that you can begin doing, things that you can implement in your day-to-day life that can help improve mood and help improve the way that you feel. So a couple of ground rules I want to talk about is everything that I share today is educational. I'm not a medical doctor. If you ask, I won't give you advice on what you should do as far as medication for anything, whether it's depression or apathy or anything else. That's between you and your healthcare provider. So these things that I'm going to give you are just things to consider that you might want to try. If something resonates with you, if you hear something that I share and you think, wow, that's really interesting, write it down. If you're like me, if you don't write something down, you're probably going to forget it. So that's how I operate. So I would encourage you to do that. And if you're a care partner on this call today, everything that I say applies to you too, right? And in fact, whether you're a care partner, you're a person with Parkinson's, you're just somebody who's on this call because you want to learn something new. All of the strategies that I'm going to present today are effective for anyone. They're not specific just to Parkinson's disease. There's some research on each one of them. I'm not research heavy today at all. So I'm giving you practical strategies, things to consider. So here are the 5 emotional challenges that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about grief. What is grief? How does it manifest? Apathy, depression, anxiety, and demoralization. 5 things that are very commonly seen in people with Parkinson's. Sometimes they're all seen in one person. Sometimes we go from one to another, and it's not a linear process that we go through stages, if you will, of emotional challenges. So I'm gonna introduce each one of those to you a little bit before we talk about what to do about them. So here's the first poll question. So bear with me one second here. I will hit the button. So now, if you open your app that you just signed in with, you should see this poll question pop up asking so that I can get an idea who's on this call. And so you guys should be able to see that and kind of spread out. Still coming in. All right. Seems like many were able to get this to work. That's great. I told Anuba and Shelly, I just learned how to do this week with this specific product, and seems like it's working fairly well. So it looks like most people who are on here are people who have Parkinson's disease, which is not surprising. Few care partners, other care providers, one movement disorder specialist, and a couple of others. So it just gives me an idea who I'm speaking to. I had a pretty good idea when I came in, but like to be sure about that. So we will stop the poll here and go on to the next question, or not, next slide. So, it's the interesting thing about Parkinson's is it's classified as a movement disorder, right? I mean, you see a movement disorder specialist. But interestingly, I could probably argue, and I think the literature is pretty clear, that it could be classified as a neuropsychiatric disorder as well, because so many of the challenges that are associated with Parkinson's disease are neuropsychiatric, these things that I just mentioned that we're going to talk about today. And so this picture of the iceberg, I think, depicts that well, that the things that people see that your movement disorders specialist uses to really diagnose you are tremor, stiffness, right? The tests that you do when you're in clinic, finger tapping and things like that. But so often the things that really affect quality of life are the non-motor issues, the things that we don't see, things like cognitive challenges, emotional mental health, speech and swallowing, fatigue, sleep issues, right? All of those things that the literature talks about, those are the things that truly affect quality of life. And I think that in the people whom I talk to who have Parkinson's, I think that's pretty fair to say that it's those types of issues that people complain about the most. And so that's kind of why what led us into a talk like this, where we're going to talk about these things that are, we'll call them hidden, but they're the things that we don't see all the time. And so obviously when someone gets a Parkinson's diagnosis, it can be overwhelming, right? We've got the physical challenges, the things we talked about, the slowness, the tremor, gait abnormalities, and those are challenging, right? Then we throw in fatigue. It's also a real issue. We've got the emotional burden, right? At the moment of diagnosis, right? There could be a reactive depression that happens. Like all of a sudden, I'm at a place where the life that I thought I had is over. It's not going to look like what I thought it was going to look like. My role in the family might potentially begin to look different socially, right? How does that affect how one interacts with friends, engagements that they used to do, maybe leisure activities that you love to engage in could be affected. And then spiritually, right? Some of the questions that we can begin to ask, why? Why did this happen? Why did this have to be to me? Things like that. And so all of these things form kind of this perfect storm that happens. And you feel like this. Um, we had published a paper a couple of years ago, a year ago, I guess now, about demoralization. And Barbara Matthews is an individual with Parkinson's disease who's also an artist. And after we published this paper, we had some of these words in the paper, and she created this for us to use as a slide as we talked. And I thought it was great because I would bet that everyone on here can relate to some of these faces that you see on here that happen, whether it's at the moment of diagnosis, whether it's when symptoms begin to get worse, whether it's when relationships change, employment changes, my role changes, right? All of these things can happen throughout the course of diagnosis to disease progression. And so one of the ones we're going to start with is grief. And I think, grief is an interesting emotional reaction. I think most people, when we think of grief, we think of when we lose a loved one, right? Someone dies. And, as I've had conversations with people, I hear that grief can often be worse when you have something that's not completely gone, right? When someone dies and you begin to move on, maybe the further you get away from that event, from that emotional challenge, the easier that the grief gets. I think one of the challenges with chronic illness, something like Parkinson's disease, is we're reminded every day of that thing, right? This change in my life, this motor disease, this emotional problem or struggles that I'm having, and they don't get better typically, right? This is a progressive disease that we don't we don't have a lot to make it better, right? Exercise is really the best thing that we have that's as close to disease modifying as we can get. And so I think it's a struggle because we're reminded of this grief along the way. And, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, as some of you may have heard, wrote the book on death and dying back in the 60s. She talked about the stages of death and dying that people go through, the emotional reaction and denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are the stages that she talked about. And back when she wrote that book, she presented them as a linear process that you go from one to the next to the next. And really, since her book and through a lot of research that's been done, we've come to the place where we realize today that grieving is not a linear process. You may struggle with denial today, and you may go to acceptance in a very short time. And then something in your disease changes, and then maybe you get angry because now there's a change in your physical functioning that doesn't allow you to do something you enjoy. Then you begin the bargaining process, then you go back to acceptance, right? So it's really more of a pendular process than a linear process. And some of the reactions, the things that you might notice associated with grief are this feeling of sadness, right? You've lost something of value. And right, it's your health. It is your ability to engage in things that you enjoy. It's the relationships that may be fading, that may not look like what they used to look like. And so as a result, maybe now I'm not engaging in these things. And so I feel lonely. I become isolated, and then loneliness sets in. And what we know really since COVID, the literature on loneliness was pretty strong, but we didn't hear about it nearly as much until we had COVID. And throughout COVID, we saw the negative results of being lonely. And the Surgeon General in 2023 classified loneliness as a global pandemic, what it's causing. And it increases motor symptoms. We saw them go up during Parkinson's disease. We saw anxiety, depression, apathy all also go up. I'm sorry, I said during Parkinson's, during COVID. We saw all of these things get worse during COVID. So loneliness is a real issue. And I think one of the interesting components of grief that can be particularly problematic with chronic illness is this idea of anticipatory grief. It's thinking about what's going to happen and it's going to be bad, right? Understanding that things are going to change, my disease is going to progress, and I'm going to lose more things. And so it's that struggle of how do I stay in a positive space when I know that disease is going to progress? And that's challenging, right? Because every day, because it's such a heterogeneous disease that it's different for everyone, we don't know what each day is going to look like. Some days you probably wake up and you feel better than others. And so it's that anticipatory thinking that can be really problematic and create a lot of emotional distress as we deal with the disease. One of the other issues with Parkinson's, and probably the most problematic and troublesome one to deal with, is apathy, right? So many of these, the other conditions that we're going to talk about, there are medication options that you can use. Apathy is this loss of motivation. I just can't get myself to engage. It's that your movement disorder specialist has encouraged you to exercise, some form of exercise, and you just can't find yourself to get up to go do it, right? And there are obviously reasons why you might not. You have fatigue today, you have pain today, but apathy is oftentimes one of the reasons that people don't engage in healthcare recommendations. And decreased physical activity, poor treatment follow-up, again, the fewer social interactions, because I can't feel motivated to engage with other people. And the difficulty is because one of the challenges becomes what causes apathy. And it's multifactorial, right? Because it could be the loss of dopamine, other neurotransmitter challenges, norepinephrine and serotonin issues in the brain, cognitive decline that is commonly associated with progression in Parkinson's disease, and then just the disease progression itself. So we're not really sure when an individual presents with apathy what the cause is. And because we don't know what the cause is, finding a treatment can be real challenging. So, there are treatments that are available that have shown some benefit with apathy, but we really don't have that one go-to treatment for it. And that's what makes it so difficult. And so how do we get how do you get your loved one to re-engage when they don't feel motivated and they just can't start, right? It becomes really difficult. And I can understand from a care partner's perspective. I've had this many times when I've given talks and apathy has been a topic. The care partner will say, what do I do for my loved one with Parkinson's when they don't want to engage? And it becomes challenging. And, oftentimes I think it can become nagging when one says you need to be going to exercise, you need to do these things. And one of the best pieces of advice I think I can give a care partner is, instead of telling your loved one what they should do, maybe saying, let's do, right? Instead of you should go exercise, how about let's go for a walk? Encourage them to do it together because, right, exercise is just as good for the care partner as it is for the individual with Parkinson's disease, right? And so oftentimes it's what can we do together and how can I ask you to do this without saying you should be, right? So that's one of the other challenges we deal with. Of course, depression, right? All of these things, apathy and depression, are common in 40-50% of people with Parkinson's disease, sometimes more depending on the data, but I think that's a pretty fair estimate to how often we see it. And what is depression? I think most people, if you ask them, what does depression look like, they can give you an answer. I think the common response is this feeling of sadness, right? And which is true. Oftentimes, depression is associated with sadness. But one of the struggles I think that we see is oftentimes the depression that is associated with chronic illness or Parkinson's disease isn't a clinical major depressive disorder, right? Which has to have eight characteristics or 8 symptoms associated with it to get the formal diagnosis. Oftentimes it's just, I just don't feel like I enjoy doing things like I used to do them, right? Change in sleep and appetite is very common, particularly with the diagnosis of a clinical depression. Oftentimes fatigue is associated with it, right? I just don't feel like I have the energy to do the things I used to do. And difficulty concentrating is very common. And again, like apathy, this can result from a variety of different things. The changes in brain chemistry, just the adjustment process to a chronic illness. Right, a couple of slides ago, I talked about this idea of reactive depression, which is that immediate remote emotional response to being given a life-changing diagnosis, right? I know that, for instance, when my mom was diagnosed 14 years ago, when the doctor came in and said, you have Parkinson's disease, everything in her mind stopped. And she didn't hear anything else in that conversation after that statement was made. And all of these things in her mind began flooding, right? What does that mean for my future? What about my husband? What about my grandkids? What about my friendships, right? All of these things. And she started contemplating, what am I losing as a result of this diagnosis, right? So you can see, and it makes sense how one can begin to feel sad and almost retreat to a place of I just don't know what to do. And depression really doesn't have to have one thing that triggers it. With Parkinson's, right? It makes sense at the time of diagnosis that it could trigger this type of depression. But depression, again, it can be caused by a chemical imbalance that oftentimes can be treated with medication, right? We've got a variety of medications that are very effective at treating the chemical depression component. But again, depression is just a common reaction to a struggle in life, something that is traumatic, right? I believe the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease is a traumatic event that people deal with. And so depression is a reasonable response, and it's very common. So we're going to talk about what to do about that. Hand in hand with depression is anxiety, right? This feeling of dread, fear, uneasiness, right? And again, it's kind of this idea of anticipatory grief that is associated with the anxiety. It's what's going to happen now. What's my life going to look like moving forward? Am I going to be able to do the things that I've always enjoyed doing or not? And the anxiety can come with that, the rumination, the constant thinking about how bad things are, how my life has changed, um, sleep problems, right? If you're like me, you probably have had times where you lay in bed and you want to go to sleep and you have these thoughts that just keep rolling around in your head that are negative and you can't stop them and you can't go to sleep, right? It's rumination, it's perseveration, where we can't get off of those thoughts. Irritability, goes hand in hand with anxiety. And then panic attacks can be a severe form that also do have treatment options, medication treatment options, and anxiety does too. But one of the best treatments for everything that we're talking about here is physical activity, exercise, right? And that's the challenge with something like apathy that you say, how do you overcome apathy? You engage, but how do I engage when I can't begin, right? So it's that catch 22. How do I get out of this struggle? But thinking about physical activity is the first line treatment for so many of these issues, and it's challenging. I get that. Anxiety has less attention than depression. One of the challenges with it, and even with anxiety and depression both, is so often they're undiagnosed. The literature talks about 50% of people with Parkinson's who experience these things, these symptoms, uh, don't get diagnosed at the beginning. And why is that? I think there are a variety of reasons. I think it's because originally the focus is on motor, and we're looking at the motor symptoms. And, as a newly diagnosed person with Parkinson's disease, you may not be evaluating these emotional components clearly and thinking, well, am I experiencing anxiety? Am I experiencing depression? You may not know what to say to your movement disorder specialist. Many go in to see a movement disorder specialist and they think this is the movement person. And, they're not the ones who are to deal with my emotional problems. So, one of the things that I think is important, and I'll talk about in a little while, is making sure that we communicate these issues with each other and with our providers, right? Your provider can't help you if they don't know what you need, right? So we need to talk about those things that we need. Care partners can also experience the anxiety because worry about if I leave and need respite, I need time away. What's going to happen to my loved one while I'm gone? What if they need me? What if they fall while I'm gone, right? And this constant hypervigilance, always worrying about taking care of everything, can create this anxiety in a care partner as well. And anxiety is associated with more severe motor symptoms. So the more anxious you are, the greater your motor symptoms are going to be. Your tremor is going to increase, gait abnormality, things like that. Lastly, demoralization. This is something that came up. One of my colleagues, Greg Pontone, who's a geriatric psychiatrist, he and I were having a conversation a few years ago. And he says, Brad, have you heard of demoralization? And I guess I had at the time. I could probably kind of define it. And he said, it's this idea of the inability to cope and hopeless and helpless. And he said it's prevalent in the cancer literature. Someone who's in stage cancer and you're in palliative care, people who lose meaning and they get this existential despair. And so we began talking more and more about it and looking at it in Parkinson's disease. And there have been very few papers published on it. And the literature that's out there says about 20% of people with Parkinson's experience demoralization. I think that's very underappreciated, uh, partly because it's really hard to tease apart demoralization and apathy and depression, right? They co-occur so commonly that it's real hard to measure what is just demoralization. But I think it's a very common symptom of any chronic illness that one may have. And again, it's these feelings of hopelessness, helplessness. Really, what it is, it's the guy that developed demoralization called it a subjective incompetence, and that's a very pejorative term to me, right? If you tell someone you're subjectively incompetent, that probably doesn't go over really well. But all that is I don't have the coping strategies that I need to deal with whatever the issue is that I'm struggling with. And so it's this idea of I don't know what's going to happen, and the uncertainty of Parkinson's disease can create this idea of I don't know what the meaning is, and there's no hope and there's no help. So let's try this. Another poll question. Which one of these is most challenging to you? And this is just a fill in the blank. So type the word, should show up right now, of these things that you is most challenging for you or has been most challenging for you. Still coming in. Looks like apathy is kind of in the lead now. As those of you who have seen these word clouds before, the bigger the word, the more people have said that's their answer. Apathy continues to grow. Anxiety. Yeah. It's a difficult question because I suspect many would say, all of these have been a part, or several of these have been struggles, or they change over time, right? It could have been apathy a year ago. Maybe today I'm struggling with anxiety. So, one of the things that I want to make sure that everyone realizes is these reactions and emotional challenges with Parkinson's are normal, right? However you feel is okay, and it's normal, right? Um, I think most people often, well, many people believe they shouldn't feel depressed. I shouldn't feel anxious. And I think anytime we have these ideas in our heads about I should or I shouldn't, that also begins to create this anxiety because I feel like I'm doing something wrong or I'm feeling in a way that I shouldn't feel. And so it's important to normalize that it's okay if you're feeling depressed and if you're feeling anxious and you're feeling demoralized. The the expectation, or really what needs to happen as a result, is talk about that. Share that with someone and figure out what we can do with it. So, we've gone through all of these challenges, and I'm sure now you're like, great, you've shared all of these emotional challenges that are never fun to deal with. And we've talked about each one of them and kind of made it clear. Thanks for the encouragement. And so I always hate having a talk that feels like we just spent time talking about the problem and not the solution. But one of the things that you'll be getting at the end is Shelley and Anuba have put together a toolkit with some explanations of how you can identify anxiety, depression, demoralization, and some ways to deal with them along the way. So you're going to get a resource kit at the end that will help summarize some of these things that we're talking about. So we're going to dig in now to some practical ways to deal with the emotional side. And one thing is, none of these tools that I'm going to give you are going to eliminate those challenges, right? All they are designed to do is give you a coping strategy which can help you better deal with the struggles associated with those things. Now, there are times that some of those things might go away as a result of some of the things that I suggest. But I don't want you to believe that if I do this, I'll no longer have apathy, right? So just that's kind of a caveat as we go through that. Hopefully these will give you some opportunities to practice some new things. As I mentioned earlier, probably one of the most important things is communicating, telling your loved one, telling your medical provider what you're struggling with. And one of the things I think is really important is begin to keep a journal or a notebook about how you feel, right? Because you see your movement disorder specialist maybe every 6 months, and you walk in and they say, how have things been going since I saw you last? They're going to do all the testing, right? They're going to see how your movement is, UPDRS stuff. And probably oftentimes you forget how you felt 4 months ago. And you may only be thinking about how you feel now. So it really can help your provider if you come in with, these are the things I've been struggling with, so that they get addressed in a timely fashion. And your medical provider can help you decide, do I need to go to counseling, which is always a great option. I think counseling for everyone is beneficial. There's really no downside to going to see a professional counselor. Um, and the other thing is they can help you decide, and your care partner can help you decide if there's something that's going on that you need to reach out for more help, right? Particularly if you're having thoughts of hurting yourself or hurting someone else. As a care partner, if you hear that, it's really important to reach out to make sure that the individual gets the help that they need. So communication is critically important, and listening, right? Um, Listen to what they say, confirm what they're saying. Make sure that as a care partner that you don't ever minimize how they feel or act like they should feel differently, right? Let them know that you can appreciate what they're dealing with. So one of the first things that is beneficial is this idea of self-compassion. Kristen Neff is a psychologist who's down at the University of Texas, and she's been doing work on self-compassion for the last 20 years. And really what self-compassion is treating myself the way that I would treat a friend, a loved one, someone whom I care about, and beginning to do that for me, right? And so there are three components to self-compassion that can help. And the first one is meditation. Begin to think about those things in my day and become focused on the here and now rather than focused on the past, the person that I used to be, the things that I used to be able to do, and not focusing on what I'm not going to be able to do tomorrow. Focus on right here, right now, the friendships that I have. I'm doing the best that I can, and getting just in the moment is one of the best first places to start. The second one was common humanity, understanding that I'm not alone. Suffering happens to everyone at some point in our lives, right? And oftentimes I think with chronic illness in particular, we can begin to feel alone, like I'm the only one who's dealing with this. And that can lead us into a place of feeling lonely and isolated. Understanding that other people are also struggling and I'm part of a community of people can also help us feel less alone. And the third thing is self-kindness. Interesting, when she's talking about self-kindness, she talks about things like putting your hand on your heart and just feeling that, giving yourself a hug, right? We know what the literature says about the responses of giving someone a hug. The person who receives it has a physiologic response that's positive to that hug. And now we've got literature that talks about how when you hug yourself, your own heart rate can go down. You also have a physiologic response that's positive. And so it sounds funny, right? Give myself a hug, hold myself on the shoulder, cross my hands over my chest, things like that, that show love to yourself. And so on the bottom of this slide, there are some things that you can try, that saying things like identifying that this is hard, naming it. I'm struggling right now. I'm not alone. And then thinking about what your next step is, right? What can I do? And that might be give myself a hug. It might be writing a letter to myself, right? If you were going to write a letter to a loved one who was struggling with something, imagine the kind words that you would probably say in that letter. Now write that letter to yourself. Use your name in the letter when you write it, and give yourself encouragement along the way. Excuse me. Is very beneficial. The other thing is, we've talked about it a little bit throughout, is this idea of I should be or I shouldn't be, right? That creates a whole lot of cognitive challenges for us. And sometimes it's a matter of cognitive reframing, just changing the way that I talk to myself, right? Instead of I should be, I'm doing the best I can right now, right? Then I don't begin to feel like I'm failing or there's something I need to be doing differently. And so really what it comes down to is speaking to myself the same way that I would speak to a loved one. So that's self-compassion. That's one of the first things that we can do. I like this quote, the struggle ends when gratitude begins, right? The data on gratitude and how much it affects everyone, whether you have a chronic illness or not, is overwhelming. People who have more gratitude have better quality of life. They have lower depression, they have lower anxiety, they have lower physiologic issues, they have better subjective well-being, right? I could go down the list of everything that gets better for people who have gratitude. Now, the struggle becomes when I'm dealing with an issue, Parkinson's disease, and the changes that are associated with that, it can become difficult to be grateful, right? And so one of the things we've got to begin to think about is how can I find things in my life that I'm grateful for? And one of the things that does is it gets me out of the rumination. Remember, I talked about those thoughts that we can lay in bed at night and we're thinking about all of the struggles that I'm dealing with. When I have gratitude, it begins to override that. And it just helps our anxiety level to drop. You know, I used to work years ago, I worked in a substance use disorder center with guys who were coming out of prison who had substance use disorder challenges. And I remember asking this guy, he came to talk to me, and I encouraged him to write a gratitude list. And I said, bring it to me when you're done. And he said, okay. And the next day he walks in and he hands me this sheet of paper. And it's a lined sheet of paper and it's got a line down the middle. And he's got one side of the paper filled out. So maybe, I don't know, 26 items, right, on one side. And I looked at it and I ripped it up and threw it away. And he kind of gave me a funny look. And I said, let me help you get started. You have two eyes, two ears, a nose and a mouth, five fingers on each hand. You can walk, you can talk, you can hear, you can see, right? Things that we take for granted in our life, you know, waking up in a warm bed, having air conditioning in Texas when it's going to be 100 degrees this weekend, right? Those things that I can begin to take to not appreciate because of my state of mind. So one of the things, several things that you can do right away is begin a gratitude journal. Write down 3 things that you're grateful for every day. Don't repeat those things. So 3 things today, 3 different things tomorrow, 3 different things the next day, and read that list as you go. Watch how that changes your demeanor and it changes your outlook. Send one thank you text to a friend. Thank someone out loud for what they did, right? And be specific when we think, right? Having a friend say thank you to you is nice, but it's even better when they say thank you for this and this. That really meant a lot to me, right? Tell people what you're thankful for. Maybe it's the time that they spent with you. Maybe it's the dinner that they made for you, the lunch they made for you, right? Be specific. And the last bullet point there is I put this thing called glimmers. Some of you may have heard that. It was out on YouTube probably, I don't know, 5 years ago. And it's the idea of we often hear about triggers in our life, right? What are these things that I experience that cause me to feel negative, that cause me to have anxiety, depression, apathy, right? Those are triggers. And the opposite idea to that is our glimmers. What are these things that I can see in my day that give me joy, that give me peace? Maybe it's the sunrise. Maybe it's looking out my window at work and I see the sunshine and I see people walking on campus, right? It's a cup of coffee in the morning that just gives me joy, right? So it's beginning to find those things, paying attention, right? That's mindfulness, paying attention to the present, what's going on right now. And that will begin to help us become more grateful. Meaning and purpose, right? I know Again, the literature on people who have more meaning in life have better outcomes, just like we saw with gratitude. In fact, it goes so far as there's research that shows people who have the highest meaning in life have lower mortality rates. And that's a pretty powerful statement just for finding meaning, right? And the challenge with something like Parkinson's disease is often meaning can be interrupted immediately, right? Many people in our world, one of the first questions we ask each other is when you meet them, right? Hi, I'm Brad, you're so and so. What do you do? Right? Our meaning is so often tied into what we do, and that becomes our identity. And when we have something like Parkinson's disease, as it progresses, that can change that. And my meaning can begin to change. Maybe I was the primary breadwinner in my home, and now I can't do that. So my meaning is different. Um, Work, right? Other relationships that change. So meaning can dramatically change as we get this diagnosis. And so we know that meaning is associated with everything good, well-being, quality of life, lower anxiety, depression, apathy. That data is out there. And so the question that I get all the time is, that's great, but how do I find meaning? Right? The simple answer to that is you can find meaning anywhere. Right? You can find meaning in a walk for nature. You can find meaning sitting on a bench outside in a sunny day. But one of the tools that you'll see in the toolkit that Shelley put together is what's called a values in action survey. And one of the things that's important as we begin to try to search for meaning or find things that are more meaningful, right? Just because we're searching for meaning in life doesn't mean we don't have it. It might mean that we want more. We want something different. And so what happens is you'll take the values and action survey and you will find what are the top five things that you value? Creativity, kindness, courage, generosity, right? It'll tell you what those things are based on your responses to the survey. And one of the easiest ways to find meaning is link your values to the things that you engage in, right? So if my value is creativity, maybe I paint, I draw, I create music, right? If one of my values is generosity, I do kind things for other people. In fact, that ties into another way that we find meaning is altruism, right? When we do things for other people, we tend to get so much more out of that, right? Think at Christmas time for me at this point in my life, when I was a kid, it was different, right? You want to receive, but as we get older and we grow up, there's so much joy in giving gifts to people, helping people who are in need. And that's such a way to build meaning and purpose in our lives. So, what still matters to me, right? Ask yourself that question. What are the things that really matter in my life? And do things that make you feel good about that thing. And again, I already talked about turning one value into action. Maybe it's taking a friend out to lunch, right? That helps meaning because you're being altruistic, and especially if one of your values is generosity, right? So you're killing kind of two birds with one stone at that point. Identify your why. Friedrich Nietzsche, many years ago, had a quote, and it said, "Once we know our why, we can handle any how." And so knowing what your meaning is and what your purpose is makes the struggles that we have to deal with along the way much more bearable. So it's finding what is that thing that really gives my life meaning. And the last one I have there, right, is serve someone. I've kind of already talked about that one. So those are some simple things that you can do. The other one that I've kind of talked about already as well is social connection, right? I talked about what we see from the data from loneliness and how it negatively impacts nearly every health outcome we want to measure, up to and including mortality, right? People who are lonely die sooner than those who aren't. And so what does that look like? It looks like maybe it's a Parkinson's disease support group. Maybe it's finding someone, a friend that you haven't connected with in a while, and you're thinking, I really would like to see so and so again. Maybe send them a text. Could we have coffee? Could we have lunch? Could we just have a phone call? Maybe it's a Zoom call and we just chat, right? We've got these wonderful tools that we use in our hands all the time with our phones, and we have FaceTime. Now that I'm a grandparent, it's beautiful. I get to get on FaceTime with my daughter and see this grandbaby, right? We can do that same thing with our friends, right? Someone that I haven't seen in a while. Connect with them. Have a real conversation about how they're doing. So maybe this week, think about what's Friday. In the next week, think about someone that you can connect with, not just to engage and talk about what you need or the things, a task, but someone, let's just have coffee. Let's have lunch. Let's have a chat. Just to no expectation, no agenda. Let's just connect. Maybe it's joining a PD support group. I know that PD support groups aren't for everyone. I get plenty of questions about, I'm not interested in that. What else can I do? It's connecting in another type of group. Maybe it's a church group that you're involved in, right? Spirituality is one of the greatest ways that people find meaning and purpose in their life. So again, you're taking care of meaning and purpose, and you're also taking care of social connection if you have a church group that you're involved in. Maybe you and your spouse, your care partner, can do something together. A Parkinson's support group that is for both, right? We have those that they meet and they break off, and the person with Parkinson's goes one way and the care partner goes the other. And, I think the benefit to those is we begin to normalize some of the struggles that we're dealing with. And we begin, again, going back to the self-compassion piece and the common humanity, we begin to feel like we're not alone. And again, I know there are also struggles associated with that, but I think there are a lot of benefits to connecting socially and finding people that you can just have a conversation with and be yourself. Another poll question. Let me get it rolling here. This is a short answer. And one practice that you heard about today that you can implement, right? Everything that we heard about can be done right now, right? I can sit here and think of things that I'm grateful for and be making a list. I can get on my phone and I can make a connection with someone, plan dinner, plan something over the weekend, right?
So Brad, some people did not have the QR code.
Okay.
So I
Type
guess
it in
just type your question, the answer in the chat box for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And Anuba, if you'll look at those as they come through, you can kind of
Mhm.
share them with us and we can
Yes.
see. I see gratitude, serving someone, exercise. Yeah. Um, I think one of the things that's important is I think I see this that can happen in support groups at times is maybe someone feels like they don't have anything to share. And so there's not value in me going. Know that just being there and holding space for other people to have a group is valuable. That's serving someone else, just being in present and being there for someone else who's struggling. So I think that there are lots of ways that we can get involved. Um, so yeah, I think we're seeing anything else coming in on your end, Anupa?
Someone said exercise. Let's see. Gratitude,
Yeah, let's see. Oh yeah, we're seeing more here.
making good connections.
Yeah. Finding my values,
Hmm.
connecting, send a note to my movement disorder specialist, right? How about that? Telling them how much you appreciate them. Service, reaching out. Yeah. So I think, my hope is call a friend. Yeah. My hope is that something that I shared with you today, you might be able to employ in your daily life. So I'm going to reiterate that emotional challenges of Parkinson's disease are normal and they're okay. Because you're struggling doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, right? It's important that you know that. It's also important to know when my struggle becomes something that I can't deal with, I need to ask for help, right? As a care partner, make sure that you're asking your loved one, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What are you struggling with, right? Ask open-ended questions so that they have to respond rather than, are you feeling good today? Right? That's a yes, no. It's so much better to ask questions that require a response. We get more information that way. And again, I'm going to reiterate some small steps, things that you guys just typed in. Talk with each other how you're feeling. Practice self-compassion, right? Begin to use mindfulness, thinking about being in the present moment, right here, right now. Thinking about what are the things that as I sit here, what do I notice, right? As you're at home, you notice your computer screen. Maybe you notice your spouse. Maybe you notice the chair you're sitting in. That's how we practice mindfulness, right? Look for the glimmers in your daily life, things that give you joy. Practice gratitude, being grateful for those things, telling someone you're grateful for them and why. Stay connected, right? Find people whom you can chat with, talk to, have coffee with, whatever it may be, and ask for help if needed. Your movement disorder specialist, any of the providers whom you see, they're there to help you, right? But they can only help you if they know what you need. So again, I encourage keeping a journal of how I'm doing in between visits so that when you go to see your doctor, you can say, these are the things I've been struggling with, and allow them to give you guidance and give you options about how you might move forward. So if you're still awake, I'm happy to field questions. My email is there. I'm always open to email questions, email connections. I love connecting with people. So you're always welcome to send me an email. And anything that I might be able to offer to you, I'm happy to do so. So I think Anuba and Shelly probably can see the chats that are coming in. I'm going to end this show.
Thank you so much, Dr. McDaniels. This was amazing. As one of our attendees actually said, they really enjoyed that there was information and then a connection to the tools and resources. So that was really great. I have a few questions that people had posted earlier, and we could go to those a little bit just because everybody's journey is so individual with
Yeah.
Parkinson's. But also, I want to mention that a lot of people are asking for resources as well, and Shelley has been responding because that is what her organization does. So that'll be lovely that people actually access more of the website that Shelley has and the forum that she has to seek resources. But going back to some of the questions, some folks had asked about the depression that comes from the loss of identity, and you mentioned the values in action survey. That's really great. But if you could speak just a little bit more about what that means, like the loss of identity that comes with Parkinson's.
Yeah. And, I kind of talked a little bit about that. Obviously what happens is my assumptive world, who I think I am in the world that I live in, and the value that I bring to life and people around me can change after Parkinson's diagnosis, and not necessarily only at the time of diagnosis, right? Because this changes whether you're in early disease or late disease, and symptoms begin to change and worsen, quite frankly, over time. That idea of who am I what is my role, can begin to change. And, my role in my marriage, my role as a parent, my role as a friend, as a worker, that can be damaged because maybe I can't do the things that I used to do. And again, there's a depression that can come with that because I begin to feel like I'm not enough, I'm less than, um, I I'm not good for anybody now because I can't do the things that I used to do. Identity is a real problem, and oftentimes it's very associated with meaning. Right. Because again, the number one place that we see in the literature that people find meaning is in their work. The research that's done on that shows spirituality, work, and relationships. Those are the top three. And when we lose work, we are in this place of trying to ask the question of who am I? What am I? Who am I now? And what am I going to do in this world, in these relationships that I have? And so beginning to identify what are my values. I probably before I learned about the values and action survey years ago, I don't know if someone asked me what are the things that you value, if I could have answered that question really well. But it's been so eye-opening to me. And the interesting thing is sometimes those change over time. My values 20 years ago are very different probably than they are today. And so take that survey that's again free, and Shelley's got it in the resource toolkit, and see what it shows you. Talk about those values with your loved one, with a friend, and it's always fun to compare what those are and see, can you see that value in someone else, right? They say, my value is gratitude. And you're like, yes, I can always see how grateful you are for everything. And you begin to make that connection. It's really fun to have that. But identity struggles are real. And we've got to continue to try to find things that bring value to me and meaning.
So the toolkit that Dr. McDaniels is mentioning is the one that we are going to send you right after this event is over, and it'll also sit on Shelley's forum, which is DFW Parkinson's resource, and also be available to our webpage for the Total Care program at UT Southwestern. So you can access it multiple ways. Also, I want to mention this event is being recorded, so it will be available for you to watch or have others watch, anybody who couldn't attend at our web page on our Total Care page at UT Southwestern as well. So, Dr. McDaniels, there's an interesting question about how much of these, symptoms and issues that you discussed can really be treated with or dealt with the tools and counseling and things like that. How much of it is physiological, and what does that entail? Where do we go with that?
It's a great question, and it's a difficult question to answer, right? Oftentimes it's a trial and error question. I know that I mentioned Greg Pontone earlier, who's a geriatric psychiatrist, and he will often, try some things before he begins with medication to see if it helps. And then sometimes it's a medication trial. If you've got a chemical depression and someone gives you an SSRI or an SNRI depression medicine, it's likely going to improve. The literature is pretty clear on that. If it doesn't improve, it's probably not a chemical issue. It's more of a behavioral issue. It's more of a situational issue, situational depression. And so that's a really difficult question to answer. I think my initial response is more like Greg's, is try these things and see if they help. See if the mindfulness helps. See if gratitude helps, if finding meaning helps. I believe that it does most of the time. Clearly, there are times that people need medications. And that's one of the reasons that I talked on multiple places about the importance of communicating with your provider, making sure that they know how you're feeling, what are the symptoms that you're experiencing, right? Sleep, appetite loss, inability to get up, fatigue, right? They'll be able to help ascertain whether it's a major depressive disorder, which will invariably require medication, or whether it might just be situational and giving you some coping strategies may be adequate to help you get through. So I think I kind of danced around that question a little bit because it's a really difficult question to answer, and it's very specific to an individual situation.
Thank you. No, that was helpful. Um, Before I ask the next question, and that'll be the last one, I do want to mention all of the questions regarding resources that people are asking about support groups, counselors who work specifically with Parkinson's, and those are resources again that you can go to DFW Parkinson's resource, or ask us offline for something that'll help you individually. You can always write to OBI, Total Care Program at utsouthwestern.edu. You can write to Dr. McDaniels. He offered that, and also to Shelley. The last question that I'm going to ask you about, Dr. McDaniels, is the value of the effects of having more education, knowing more about the disease. How does that impact any of these symptoms and challenges that people have?
Yeah, I think education's important. I think understanding how Parkinson's disease is going to change as time progresses, right? We talked a little bit about it. It's a progressive neurologic condition, right? So we know that over time, my symptoms are going to get worse. Over time, I'm probably going to need more Cinemet, i.e. dopamine, in my system to help control the slowness that I'm dealing with, right? And so I think one of the things that education helps is with maybe the anxiety of what can I expect, right? I know that this is going to progress. I also know from an educational perspective that if I exercise, I can help slow how quickly some of these symptoms progress, right? So I think education it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because it can also increase anxiety if I know that this is what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years, but we don't even know that, right? There are people whom I know that have had Parkinson's for 20 years whose symptoms are still pretty mild. And so it doesn't mean that every year it's going to get worse. It just means it's not going to get better over time because we don't have a disease modifying therapy that's going to change the progression at this point, again, other than exercise. So I think the educational component of knowing what are some things that I can do to improve outcomes is critically important. And I think that ties into knowing that because if I don't do those things, my outcomes may not be as good. So I don't think there's ever a negative to education. I think more information is always good. It allows me to begin to evaluate the decisions that I make and the things that I want to engage in that I think will help me.
Thank you. I do want to give some time to Shelley to talk about what resources her organization offers. But right before that, since we're talking about education here, I want to mention this series is not over with this one event. We have two more events coming. One is on April 10th, where we'll talk more about connection and belonging and addressing issues like loneliness and social barriers with Parkinson's. And then I do want to mention our upcoming Total Care Program Symposium, which will also involve the last of the series in the afternoon, where we'll have a panel of care partners and patients and Dr. McDaniels and a family therapist who will be there to talk to us about some of these issues as well. So if you like this, please do sign up for our next two events as well. And with that, I want to give some time to Shelley to talk about her organization.
Thank you, Anuba. Thank you, Brad, so much for sharing. And thank you all so much for being here. Again, it's an honor to serve you guys and help connect you with some meaningful resources. As Brad and Anuba mentioned, we do have a toolkit that accompanies the material that Brad presented, and I think a couple of you asked for a copy of the slides as well, so we'd be happy to send that over, and we encourage you to use that toolkit in the days to come to keep the conversation going between yourself and your care partner, and even with us as you navigate through some of those practical activities and tools that are in there. So, another thing I do want to mention is on our website, we have a collection of resources that are local to Dallas-Fort Worth. If you go to our website, davewparkinsons.org, you can navigate those resources in one of two ways. If you go to the resources tab up at the top, you can navigate it through category. So there's a box there that says resources by category or resources by audience, just depending on which way you want to go about that. If there's something that you're looking for that you can't find, please reach out to us at info@davewparkinsons.org. I know a couple of you on here on the chat requested some specific resources for support groups and counselors, which should be on there, but if it's not, I'm more than happy to individually reach out to you and send you that information. And if there's anything that we can do to support you as you navigate this journey with Parkinson's, or if you're a care partner that's supporting someone with Parkinson's, that's why we're here. Our purpose is to serve you. So we would love to connect with you and see how we can better help you as you go through next steps. And as Anuba said, we would love to see you for part 2 as well, which is also on our website, dwparkinsons.org/mind matters. You can find the registration link on there as well. So yeah, with that, again, so happy to be here and to connect with all of you. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Next time on April 10th. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Dr. McDaniels. Please fill out our feedback form that'll come to you right after this program ends. And we'll send you all of the information that you may have missed in an email on Monday. So don't worry about that. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.